Women are often told we need to be more confident and more this, like terrible advice, because if you're trying to act confident and it's not real and you don't really know what you do, it's never going to work for you.
Several hundred executive level women. What is the best advice you're going to give to them?
You are the one who decides that you are worthy, and you are the only one who can decide that you are not.
This is Inspiring Women, and I'm Lori McGraw, and today I'm speaking with Julie Zuraw. And Julie is here, and we are at the WBL conference, and we're going to talk today because Julie is the CEO of Invest Ahead. She's also a speaker here at the WBL conference. We're going to talk about investing. We're going to talk about corporate governance. We're going to talk about women being on boards. Julie, you are an expert in terms of stewardship, corporate governance, and you have a very, very unusual career for how you got there. So thank you so much for being on Inspiring Women.
I am delighted to be here. Thank you.
Well, why don't we start, before we get to Invest Ahead.
Yeah.
First, Julie, just tell us your career journey, because let me just, in terms of
it's a little weird.
Corporate governance, we've got real estate. I mean, lawyer, that's not unusual, but in terms of the real estate and how that all came about, give us a little bit of the trajectory to how you got to here.
Yeah. Early on, I was in advertising. I was running the branding division for what's now Publicis. And left there with a couple of colleagues, a couple of women, to start a consulting practice. And so I was doing management, consulting, leadership, and eventually went on board with a client who was a real estate client and ran that company for 10 years, moved to another real estate company in New York City. So large value companies in the city, definitely a male-dominated world. And then through those experiences, I put together this program called Lead Like a Woman for women in traditionally male-dominated industries, because there's a game you have to understand and learn. And I had to sort of figure it out as I went along. So just as a labor of love, I put this program together to help other women sort of understand what they're in.
At what point? At what point did you feel like you had enough knowledge to, first of all, recognize that? I mean, I think every woman who moves into an executive career knows that things are different.
Yeah.
And you have to, not necessarily play games, but it is different. And everyone's trajectory is different. But at what point did you feel like you had enough knowledge to say, okay, I can frame this up for other people?
Yeah. It's interesting because I had learned a lot on my own, and I'd always been a leader and very confident and outspoken and all of these things in any environment. But it was really my now husband who would say, well, why'd you do that? Or you said what in that meeting? Don't you see how that sort of doesn't make you come across as strong and powerful? And so there were these learnings I was getting from somebody who was very familiar with that game. Mm-hmm. And so once I had run a couple large companies, I thought, let me do this. Yeah. So it was after, I was a grown-up.
Yeah.
It was after I had sort of figured out how things work. And so coming to Invest Ahead, which was formerly called the 30% Coalition, started in 2012. To get more women onto boards, right? Yep. Because back in 2012, it was 13% of U.S. corporate board seats were held by women, and that didn't seem right, right? It was just this very that's not fair kind of argument. And then over time, the argument shifted from, it's just not right that people are excluded to, but wait a minute, we're starting to see that companies actually perform better when boards are more diverse, and particularly...
When did that start to happen? Because in 2012, 13% of sort of women on boards, that actually is not too dissimilar to the less than 20% of women who are on C-suite anything. So the title of C something, it's still less than 20%. So it's almost proportional because, board seats being, a higher order of level, if you will. So 13%, I know it sounds terrible and it continues to not be great, but that's not as bad as the 2% of, venture funds that are out there
Right.
for women founders.
Right.
So
Yeah. When did it start to change? I would say, there were other groups out there doing this work. We're not a pipeline building organization, but there were other organizations at the time, 2020 women on boards,
Yep.
get to 20%. By
Yep.
2020, they're now called 50-50 because that benchmark was hit. So I think after, several years of really strong efforts by these pipeline building organizations and awareness being raised, that it started to shift. And research has been out there for a while that points to the fact that diverse boards, and most of the time in the past, people were talking about gender specifically, actually perform. The companies that have diverse boards perform better. So the research was out there. There were these groups making sort of a big stink about it.
Yep.
And the argument started shifting. I mean, in 2020, when everything changed in this country and a national conversation about race started again, the argument was sort of back to, this isn't right. Boards need to represent.
The moral argument.
Yeah, the moral
Right.
argument. But the fact is, the business argument has always been there.
Right.
I mean, the very first job I ever had when I came out of college and went to New York was for a nonprofit called the Child Care Action Campaign. And so back in 1990, we're making the case that to have more better and affordable child care that helps women and parents with those responsibilities, makes them more productive at work, is better for business.
Yep.
And they were making the business case.
There were so many business cases that support the need to do these things. The moral imperative is so obvious to so many.
Yeah.
Can you talk about why it's so hard?
Yeah.
Because those things being true at Invest Ahead, and yes, there has been progress. I actually don't know what the number is now. And we've crossed the 20% of terms of women being on board. But
30. We're at 30.
30.
Yeah.
But we are also going a bit backwards. There are quite a few laws that have been repealed. There are, diversity is not the same that it was just a couple of years ago in terms of how we talk about it. But before we get to that, why is it so hard? When the business case is there and it's so obvious, why doesn't it just naturally happen?
Yeah. Well, two things. I mean, think about the fact that the business case about diversity has been there since the beginning of time. In other words, if you're looking broadly for talent beyond just the people that you know, you're likely to find excellent talent. So the business case has always been there. So the fact that business has been exclusionary to certain groups is more of a social issue. And people won't say that, right? I mean, the opposite case is being made is that diversity is talking about diversity in leadership or on boards is bringing this social conversation into business. In fact, the opposite is true. The very fundamental rule of finance is to diversify. If you put all your eggs in one basket and everything's the same, your risk increases. It's the same for a board. If everybody sitting around a table thinks the same, then you're going to miss opportunities. You're going to not see risks. So it's a very simple argument that's always been true. So the reason it's so hard is that there's been sort of social status quo backlash about it. But the other reason that it's hard is that, in fairness, when you think about boards, all of us immediately think of people that we know.
Right.
So on the Invest Ahead board, when we think, okay, we've got to think of, new board nominees, everybody thinks, well, who do I know?
Right.
So it's natural that you're going to end up with people who are similar to you because it's sort of in your circle. So that's a very just natural way that these things work. So one really has to be intentional, and we have to be intentional about expanding networks and thinking broadly and looking broadly. So it's just sort of the way it naturally works that networks are small. The other argument that people make is that it's hard to find talent, right?
That is just hogwash.
Ridiculous.
So ridiculous.
Ridiculous. And of course, that's not true.
Yeah.
There's a ton of talent across every gender and racial and every other kind of category. And now there's all of these wonderful pipeline building groups with lots of members, ready,
Right.
Whom we work with. So, that's the other argument. So
I think that people often don't appreciate or know. I mean, when you have, if you're looking for a C-suite position, you have executive recruitment organizations that are out there. There are job postings. There are, people who in HR who are talent acquisition, who are looking to go and secure those positions. So it is, I would say, even more egregious if you have a C-suite management table that doesn't have a level of diversity there because you've got systems in place.
Yeah, you're paying people to look broadly.
But in boards, it's a very different process. Sometimes there'll be, executive recruitment firms that are higher, but most often that is not the case. Most often it's what you just said.
Right.
Who do you know? And it's the network of a small group of people around the table, which is only as good as your recency bias. Does somebody who you've interacted with in the last 18 months, it's like, oh, this person, because I like them, I, like working with them, as opposed to specifically going out and looking for different viewpoints, diversity of thought, diversity of all of the different factors. So how do you encourage it at Invest Ahead, where you're out there, not just advocating for it, but you're actually, putting it to work and action? Can you talk about what you do to turn the tide on this?
Yeah, for sure. We are an investor group, first of all. So our members are institutional investors, mostly pension funds, including some of the largest pension funds in the country and in the world, asset managers, and private equity firms representing $8 trillion in assets under management. So
a little bit.
Just a
little bit.
Yeah, tiny little bit of influence. So we are working with our members are the stewardship teams, which not everybody even knows that this is happening. But inside a pension fund, for instance, there's a stewardship team that's looking to make sure that all of the considerations that pension believes are material, are financially material, which include board diversity and C-suite diversity and all kinds of other things, that the companies that they are shareholders in understand that that's a priority. So they're engaging with those companies around the year. And what we do is we support our members in doing those engagements by providing them data that helps them sort of hone in on who they should be talking to, because they're invested in lots of places, where can they have the biggest impact? And so they're having conversations that say, listen, we are a major shareholder. We think these things are important. We're always looking for boards to have good governance, to be led well, and this is a part of it, and here's why. So let's have that conversation. These conversations don't turn people around, in that 30-minute hour call. It can take years. It often takes years. If somebody hasn't really thought about it, they need to be bought into the argument, see why it matters, see the research, understand why it could be useful or important for them. So it's a process, and our members are out there doing that important work. For our private equity members, we created a program a couple years ago where we also have pipeline building organizations as members. So there's a group called Latino Corporate Directors Association, LCDA, and Ascend Pinnacle for Pan-Asian directors. And ELC is the premier organization for high-level African-American executives, and so forth and so on. And 50-50 women on boards and all kinds of groups for women. And so we ask our private equity members twice a year for the qualifications their deal teams expect to be looking for.
Yep.
So this isn't necessarily a live board search, but what's coming down the pike They send us those qualifications. We go out to this dozen or so of these major pipeline building organizations and say, here are the qualifications for these firms. Send us member profiles. And of course, that's what they're in business to do. So we get back this amazing list, very long list of excellent profiles, which we then vet and call down. So we're giving back to the PE firms this sort of beautifully curated list of people they probably don't already know.
I'm sure they wouldn't.
Right? Yeah. Who fit these qualifications. And they've got time then to meet the people they want to meet, have conversations, so that the next time they're looking for that board member, and sometimes that has to happen quickly, which is why you also just, call the guy you always call. Now their network is more diverse. So that's sort of the holy grail, is at the end of the day, to have a situation where people are intentional about broadening their network. So if you're out there looking for the best right person, and you do that every time, by default, you're going to end up with a diverse leadership team or a diverse board.
How successful are you in terms of like creating that diversification in the boardroom? Do you see the progress happening? Does it take like 1 or 2 cycles before you are able to be successful with any particular one of the companies that you're working with?
Yeah, on the public side, it does. And of course, there are many fewer public companies than private companies.
And those seats turn over much
slower.
Right, slower.
Yes, very slow. In fact, all of the gains that we saw from 2020 to 2025, the majority of the seats that women took on boards were additional seats.
Right.
People just adding them to the board.
That's right. Because they were required to.
Because in California, for instance, there was a law that took 7 years to pass that required 3 women.
30 seconds to repeal.
On a board, right. It's actually still in the courts. And I have to say, Betsy Berkheimer-Credere, who's one of the founders of 50/50 Women on Boards, who's really the driving force behind that, is on our board. And so it can take longer for public company boards, but we would say hundreds of women have gotten onto boards because of the work Invest Ahead has been doing over all these years.
And by the way, by adding those additional seats, my viewpoint is good. Any way matters.
Right.
Anyway, it literally matters. And so because once you've added seats, people don't take away the seats. Then those seats are available. So that is just tremendous progress. Yeah. Let's move to how women lead. And let's move to that part of the work that you do. First of all, what is it? And what do you do with how women lead? And why is it important?
Lead like a woman.
Lead like a woman. Let me start over.
All right.
Let's talk about another important part of your work, Lead Like a Woman. First of all, what is that? What is Lead Like a Woman? Why is it important to you, and what does Lead Like a Woman do?
This is a program that I put together because I had learned on my own, as I think a lot of women do, as I advanced and ended up eventually running companies, that there's a game being played out there that's not necessarily intuitive to women, because in male-dominated workplaces, and that's where I've spent my life, in male-dominated workplaces, they're accommodating of male ways of thinking and acting because those workplaces were created by men, and that's just how it is. And women and men tend to think about power differently. We tend to communicate differently. And so as a woman, you can sometimes find that a communication that feels very typical and intuitive to you doesn't land the way you think it's going to land in this particular kind of environment. So it's important to understand that. It's also important to understand how power works so that you can position yourself to advance and gain more power. And it really is just a game. It's just a game that women don't necessarily grow up learning how to play. And
what is the game?
Well, the game is really based around the hierarchy, right? The way that white-collar workplaces tend to work. And the idea that it's a zero-sum game. There's only so much power to go around. whether it's a hierarchy in one company or a hierarchy of politics or wherever it is, but you're either at the top or you're at the bottom or somewhere in between, but there's not room for everybody at the top. So in order for me to be at the top, somebody else needs to be, in order for me to be up, somebody else needs to be down. So what it creates is this jockeying for position, right? You're trying to get up the ladder, and once you're up, you don't want to fall down. And that, we all know that, right? That's how it works. And yet, when you talk to women, and I've talked to a number of women attending this conference in preparation for speaking here, women like to think about the idea of collaborating as being a useful way of creating more opportunities for everybody, right? So it's not a zero-sum game. We can grow the pie.
Yep.
If we work together, we can create abundance for everybody.
Isn't that a good thing?
Right? Totally intuitive to
Yeah.
women. Like, wouldn't it be great if the world worked that way? But that is in fact not just different. That's the opposite of how organizations work and how power works. And so women can be uncomfortable about asserting authority and power. And I'm not interested in all it's because we're raised that way.
Yep.
And I don't care why
Yep.
that's true. That's
Yep.
just true. And I
Yep.
think there's a lot of good reasons why that's true, because women tend to think inclusively and, so forth. But it can be uncomfortable to sort of grasp and wield power the way that you need to, particularly in male-dominated industries, to advance. And I was never taught how all of this works.
Yep.
And so I created this program to teach women how all of this works.
Yep.
And I've been delivering this program. I've done it all over the world for about 5 years, as long as you've been podcasting.
There we go. There we go. And what are the secrets? Because so I think one of the secrets is you get uncomfortable. Just be good with being uncomfortable if your objective is to secure more power, be in a larger position of leadership.
Yeah.
So what are key parts of the program that you advise for others?
Here's where I like to start, is that women are often told we need to be more confident and more this, like terrible advice, because if you're trying to act confident and it's not real and you don't really know what you do, that it's never going to work for you. It's not going to come across right. So where I want to start is that there is so much value in the way that women tend to think about leadership and power, like the collaboration thing we were just talking about, like inclusiveness, wanting to make sure that everybody's included. So let's start there, that your instincts about leadership, they are correct.
Correct.
They are right.
Yeah.
Even if they're not going to be useful to you if you're in a male-dominated organization where you're going to have to learn to work in a slightly different way. Like, don't let that stuff go.
Yeah.
And your power doesn't rest in confidence, and because listen, women know how great they are, even though we're very modest and very humble. Like I don't think we have to worry about that part. Now I lost my train of thought, and this is important. Right. That power is actually about something we don't think that it's about. Power comes from clarity.
Okay.
If you are able to say what you think to another human being and accept whatever's going to come back your way, that's your power, right?
Yep.
Like, think about performance review time. Everybody hates it because people don't know how to give critical feedback. They're afraid of what people will think. People come in, but people want direct feedback. So the minute you can start looking somebody in the eye and saying, this is what I believe, or this is what's true, or this is how we're going to do it, that's your power. And you don't need to be loud, and you don't need to be controlling. You can be lovely and a very sort of restrained person, if that's your personality. Whoever you are. So your power comes actually from being clear and authentic, from being who you are. People can read a fake a mile away. And that's why when you look at politicians, the ones who last, whether you like them or not, they're the ones who are authentic and really just say what they
I
think.
like that definition of authenticity so much more than bringing your whole self, just being clear about in what you're confident in and bringing that to the conversation in whatever way works for you, whoever you are. That to me is a much better definition of how authenticity sort of like can come into that equation.
Yeah, exactly. And so to just give you an example of learning how sort of female language can land differently is female communicators. And most women are female communicators and most men are male communicators in my experience. But gender, of course, is fluid, right?
Yeah.
So there are women who are sort of male communicators and the other way around. But female communicators have this ritual around complimenting. Right? So I walk in the room and I say, Lori, oh my God, that top is gorgeous. I love that color. And you say, thanks. And you know, it's your job then to say, well, I really love that necklace
You
you're
look
wearing.
fantastic.
Yeah, right? We love that. We do that all the time. That is a female communicator ritual. It is not a male communicator ritual, right? So if you think about this idea of the hierarchy and having to position yourself up, the very act of walking around handing out compliments to other people, it actually doesn't work in that paradigm. Your job and the way male communication works is that if I'm a male communicator, my job is to give the impression that I'm the best, the smartest, the most prepared, because I'm trying in my communication to position myself up. That's the whole game.
Oh my gosh.
And so if as a woman, I give you a compliment and you're a male communicator.
Just wasting time.
It's like right over my head. I don't know. I'm just going to say like, thanks, you know? And if you're like, well, you know, what do you think about me? I might actually take that opportunity to maybe position you down. See, I'm playing my game over here, and you're playing the complimenting game, which doesn't have a place
No
over
more
here.
compliment games. Okay, got it. By the way, Julie, you don't look as great as I said you looked before. That's not true. You look fantastic.
Female communicators should keep doing this stuff. Keep doing this stuff with other female communicators. You just have to understand how it lands in different environments.
Julie, I could keep this conversation going for a long time, but as we are on Inspiring Women, we're going to close out the conversation. You are going to be speaking at this WBL conference, which is going to be absolutely fantastic to several hundred executive level women. What is, and this will air after the conference, what is the best advice you're going to give to them?
The best advice I'm going to give to them is that you are the one who decides that you are worthy, and you are the only one who can decide that you are not. And that your personal power comes from knowing your value and acting like it all the time.
Awesome. Awesome. This has been an excellent Inspiring Women conversation. I've been speaking with Julie Zuraw, and Julie, thank you so much.
You're welcome. My pleasure.